But Bjorn Lomborg isn't a. Now my point is like
he's an economist. He's
not. Yeah, he's an economist, right?
This is my issue though. If everything you said is correct and he's wrong, why don't people debate him? Because it's really just it's because otherwise you're like what you're saying is, well, you just have to trust me. It's like,
no, I just say go look at his finances and you can see what is.
But people will say the same thing about the climate scientists who, well, the journals have a particular perspective. They're not going to publish science that goes against their perspective. There's all kinds of negative incentives on no matter where you're from. And it's just like, it's just very difficult for me to accept the idea that a debate should not happen. And I understand like, well, science is not done in debate. It's done through empirical research and all that. It's like, but yes, who am I to believe though? If it's between one side that I don't have the expertise to do a debate or to do the research myself, and then another side who sounds just as credible to me as a layman, I would like to see them talk to each other and go point by point. And if they want to pull up a chart, okay, what are we looking at? Here's a chart of, the Nile River water lines over some period of time. Here's why Steve Koonin says this is his evidence, and here's the response. To me, to say that shouldn't happen is just like, well, you just got to trust us. We are the archbishops of science, right? We are the religious elite, and you must hear our perspective. That's how it looks.
The way I would see it is like what you're discussing about is more the public communication of science, right? But the issue, and there, I think you can make points about, the better way to present your argument and how you can, make clear the relative weights of evidence that exist for different positions, right? And I agree with you that it would be better to have better communicators doing that. Although I do think there are good communicators, like when it comes to climate science. But I think the issue for me is that when you put two people side by side, right, in this kind of format, and you say, okay, we're going to give you 50% time to present your arguments, right?
No. That's nerd shit. It's just freeform podcast, like a Joe Rogan.
Okay, but even in that case, right, and both sides are flashing up their diagrams and they're referencing studies and they're making points, right?
One at a time, 1 point at a time.
But slowly. What that would create is the impression that, like, well, this is a complicated issue, and both sides they both sound good, both look like they know what they're talking about. But the reality is, behind that, there is a huge field where 95% are, and the overwhelming amount of empirical evidence is on the side of this guy.
And then that should manifest itself in the debate. If that's true, then they should easily win the debate. I don't believe you can lie and be that dishonest in that extended of a conversation.
It's not lying, though. It's not lying. It's just making rhetorically strong arguments. Like
I think that's my hang up of just like, if you simply allow genuine dialogue and you don't put it's not like an Oxford debate where I get up and speak for 30 minutes and do this rhetorical, sorry, I didn't mean to insult Oxford. Like the style of debate where it's like I talk for 30 minutes uninterrupted. It's like, no. Jamie, pull up evidence slide 1. We're going to go through this and if we spend an hour on this one chart until we come to a consensus. And I've seen debates work like that. For example, Joe Rogan had a debate between a vegan and a meat eater. And it was a 4-hour long podcast. Yeah. Okay. And I watched, and it was Game Changers, the guy who did the documentary afterwards. I watched a documentary because of that debate, because I was like, you know what? I'm an avid meat eater. I'm rooting for the meat eater guy to win. And yet he lost. And he lost after 4 hours of extended debate looking at each individual thing. And that changed my mind as someone who came in with a very strong bias that I want to eat meat. And it's just like, well, the scientific consensus is, how can it work for a meat eating debate, but not for a climate debate?
But then, so it's not that you can't sway people through debates and that you can't make persuasive arguments. It's that the underlying evidence base doesn't reflect how persuasive individuals are in debates very often.
I disagree with that. Just like fundamentally, you have. I
can give you an example that I know personally. Brett Weinstein and Alexandros Marinos spent multiple hours going through the Together trial and pointing out all these very specific technical issues that they thought completely undermined the validity of the trial and were kind of illustrating how it was a setup. It was rigged to show that ivermectin wouldn't work. Right now,
Sure.
if you watched that, I think most people, especially most people who aren't familiar with clinical trials, would see that as a very scientific, careful dissection.
Totally. Were they debating each other, or were they in agreement with each other?
No. They are they're discussing the study, but the reason I mention it is I would say even from my perspective, what that looks like to from a presentation is a careful scientific dissection, right? Piece by
piece. Not a debate.
Not a debate. But
that's
hold
the
that
critical
for
thing.
a second.
Okay, go ahead.
Hold that for a second. So, you'll end up taking my word for this, but I. So I don't know if it'll be that convincing, but just for the premise of this argument, just accept that I'm representing this accurately. Relevant experts would have regarded what they did as absolutely terrible, right? Misrepresenting things, and failing to understand core elements, reflecting that they don't have the expertise to do what they're appearing to do, and kind of editorializing that they're doing. Now, if you spoke to an actual expert who runs trials, their raison d'etre is to assess trials and go through it, and they know that study is a very good study, and for all the reasons why the particular objections that Alexandros and Brett raised are incorrect, their ability to accurately explain that in a conversational debate versus people like Brett and Alexandros, who are almost pure creatures of rhetoric, they would lose 9 times out of 10. I would say, and it wouldn't change that fundamentally their critique is wrong, and the evidence base for ivermectin is extremely weak. And if you just went and looked at the literature, without looking at the debates, you would come away with a very clear image that there isn't strong evidence for ivermectin. If you go and look at debates online, you'll end up very confused, because
this is the fundamental question. I can't believe this is the case because it's a law of large numbers. You said the consensus is that Brett is wrong, right? That with his claims on ivermectin or whatever. Okay, so that must mean that there are 20 times as many people as Brett who are knowledgeable and would say he's wrong, or some number, 15 times as many, 20 times as many. Something is that fair to say?
Yeah. Yeah.
How is it possible that of that group that is 20 times the size, that none of them are capable of articulating themselves as well as Brett? I don't believe that.
No. So well, one of the reasons would be because their job, the people out of that subset, the amount who are focused on science communication is much smaller. The majority of people who are focused on research, they're researchers. They're not people that are good at social communication and or explaining things to a non-technical
not a single
audience.
One.
No, but it's not you said, if you have such a huge amount of people that could,
at least there'll be a couple who can be on par.
But that number gets dramatically shortened when you take people that are good and then you take people that are good at dealing with debates, that are familiar with rhetorical style thing, and then the Oxford Union debates actually, but that then becomes an even smaller subset. In fact, the people that specialize in that is pretty much their career, is that they become people who are focused on communication and kind of rebutting arguments, and they don't spend their time doing research because they do exist. Those people do exist, but often the inverse is true, that the people who you might see as being dodged will not engage with those people because they're not high profile enough or that kind of thing. But in either case, I would say that if you go by the discourse, you're likely to be misled because a lot of that relies on charisma, rhetoric, and that's not what science is based on.
Sure. I think just it's the I know exactly what you mean by it. Someone can come off sounding good to the average person, but like, I trust myself that when I'm listening to a debate that I'm aware enough of who is being dishonest here, who is just using rhetoric, or who is just gish galloping and all that. And it's just like, I've listened to plenty of interviews on Lex Friedman, on Joe Rogan, on whoever, of like academics, scientists, and I don't believe they're all as, autistic communicators as you might, indicate. Well, there's a very small number of them, and even a smaller group is like, well, it's very interesting that all of the people who just so happen to disagree with the consensus happen to be also the best communicators. It's like that. Just I don't see that. I don't see how that's the case.
It's not necessarily that. It's that the people, like, if you want to get attention, the way to do it is not to present a boring mainstream consensus position. And similarly, like the figures that you see on Jordan, or like,
if you want to get attention, you should debate Brett Weinstein. That's a good way to get attention, is go out and debate all these people that for a fact are wrong. And I don't mean you specifically, I mean just in general.
My position, there's some people in the chat were mentioning that, like, my view is the consensus never changes in science, and it isn't. My view is just that science is not a like subjective postmodern Rorschach. There are things which are like, exactly what you said with evolution, right? The amount of evidence for evolution is overwhelming now. And it's at the point where, like, to doubt that evolution occurred, it's not putting you in, that you have a valid like position which needs to be like considered in depth and debated, right? You need to refute a huge mountain of triangulated evidence from different things, fossils and genetics and carbon dating and all the different lines of evidence that point in the same way. The same is true of the consensus around climate change.
Yeah, but and I made the point earlier that, like, I love Jordan Peterson precisely because he's bringing evolution straight to the fundamentalists. Is like, I want those debates to occur. I would donate money to charity. Like I said, if Jordan Peterson and, like, who's an evolutionary denier that likes Jordan, like a William Lane Craig or someone, if Peterson and William Lane Craig got in a debate about evolution, I love that, because William Lane Craig couldn't be like, oh, well, you're a cringe atheist, Richard Dawkins. And
would you? Well, yeah. So I would enjoy it too. But here's the point that I would make to that.
Yeah.
Just say Jordan had an off day, right? And William Lane Craig had his best day ever, and he presented what appeared to be, much more effective, and he countered all things, and he raised these issues that Jordan hadn't researched to know about. The actual evidence for evolution, the scientific consensus,
would still be the same. Yes.
But a lot of the people who saw the
think
debate,
otherwise. Right. To me, this question. Okay. Well, my response to that would be like, if you asked me, well, what if LeBron James played the best high school player in the world and LeBron lost? It's like, well, theoretically that could happen, and that wouldn't mean that LeBron is worse than that high school player. I just don't think that. If I really believed that, as I do, that evolution is the easier side to argue for, I just don't think that would happen. And if it did, then it would require another debate. And if William Lane Craig would walk away and be like, well, I won that one time, I don't want a rematch. I get your point. It is absolutely the case that, generally speaking, rhetoric wins a lot. But I have, and this is for my own reasons, time and time again, the people who thrive on rhetoric and not truth, they will pay a price for it eventually. And whether it's Vosh, people I've debated, or whether it's like the Candace Owens or the Steven Crowder, if you're grounded on rhetoric, which I would say making your points on rhetoric is another way of saying lying, because, like, to argue for something that isn't true using rhetoric would be a form of lie. That's at least how I would look at it.
If the point would be, like, the part that isn't true, but I think a lot of people, they're not, like, I wouldn't say lying.
They're outright lying per se.
They're not misrepresenting what they believe.
Sure, but they're
they just
manipulating reality in a way that does not reflect reality itself, and they're using rhetoric to do it.
yes,
Right. I would say
definitely the
that
case.
yes. Okay. And this is my personal philosophy, and I know we'll end here because it's probably like 2 a.m. by you. My personal belief is that people who do that will inevitably pay the price. And I do think it's a matter of like, you can only go online for a certain amount of time until your head gets filled with lies to the point where it does actually play out in the real world. And like the stuff with Candace Owens and Steven Crowder, or the internal fights on the left or the right, it just, there's always gonna be a cult group of people. Like there's always gonna be some fundamentalist Christians who are gonna say that Earth is only 6,000 years old. But if in order for them to maintain that belief, they have to say, well, Jordan Peterson's a heretic or Jordan Peterson's a heathen. Well, now all their friends are like, but Jordan Peterson's not that. He's like kind of on our side. So, and that's a whole other big thing. But I will let you, if you've got any final thoughts or questions or anything.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say is like, I think part of the discrepancy in our views is because I spend so much time with conspiracy communities and kind of guru figures, and the kind of moral landscape or just world that you're presenting, I don't see it in function so often because I see people rewarded with attention, with money for presenting arguments which are fallacious but rhetorically powerful and that people find appealing. And you know, where Jordan Peterson fits into that, you can disagree. You know, I think people can draw different opinions on it, but I would prefer if your version of reality was correct. So like I can agree that I would like it to be that case, and I would like it to be the case that over time, in a debate situation, that the side with the better empirical evidence won more frequently. And I can see why people think that would happen, but I'm very, very familiar with people who are very fluent and very good at making arguments with memorizing large amount of facts.
Yep.
And I know how persuasive that can be, because in my case, even when I outright know that the person is wrong, I still find myself in the moment, you know, sometimes finding it compelling. And it's only when you like stop it and go and check into things. And that's the thing which almost always people don't do. What they do is like what Joe Rogan's Jamie does, which is they pause and they look up on Google and they say, hey, Jones did reference a document. Like there is a Bohemian Grove, you know, and then they move on. And so, but in any case, you know, we're not going to resolve any of it
one step at a time.
But
yes,
but I you know, to frame it in a positive way, you're more optimistic than I am.
Yes, in some ways, maybe.
I think that's yeah. So that's the case. But it's been an enjoyable conversation. And,
yes.